So I want to talk today about the culture of excellence, and I've invited a really good friend of mine, somebody who knows a lot about excellence in the boardroom, excellence in the change room, in the sporting change room, and he is Mr. Anta Isaac. Anta, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for the opportunity.
Now, Anta's a really interesting guy because, as I said, he has corporate experience in the boardroom, but also in the field of sports. And I often look at sports people as a form of encouragement, a form of aspiration, because they achieve such great things. And there are often parallels between sport and business. Anta, from your experience and your vantage point, before we get into who you are, how do you assess those two similarities and how do you see the relationship between sport and business?
Um, Peter, that's a interesting question. Look, I think in a practical sense, they're very similar. You'll find in most professional sporting organizations, they will, they're all multifunctional institutions and they share a lot of the more common function areas that support a business, being, finance, HR, whether it's product or service research and development, marketing and so forth. Where it differs slightly in my experience is sporting organizations almost have a characterization of a government institution, because there are function areas that also have a really critical impact on, the bottom line, on the fans or customers, including international relations departments, capability building officers, legal and regulatory function areas. And besides that as well, there are so many different products that need the attention of the leaders in the sporting organizations. And a lot of people maybe aren't aware. So as an example, at Football Australia, where I'm a board member at the moment, we have 9 different national teams, and each one has a very different persona and profile that either engages and interests different people. The two that most people would be aware of are probably the national men's team Socceroos, national women's team Matildas, but there are then another 7 national teams and a whole host of products like competitions and so forth, and each of them are serviced differently. So that's more the practical sense. I think where the differences are really noticeable for me, who has had the experience of being in more, I guess, common businesses and sport, are the philosophical elements. So talent management, for example, I'm not sure how much really time and effort a lot of businesses invest in talent management. In sport, it's everything. It's identifying talent that has not necessarily have any impact on your business, not in the next 12 months, not in the next 24 months, but potentially in 10 years' time. And then how to nurture that talent, how to put it in the right environment, that it develops the way you need it, so that in 10 years' time, you do benefit as a business from that, right? And that happens pitch side and front office as well, where we're creating things like a depth chart, pitch side for coaches, for support staff, for players, and then front office for key people that'll take over in terms of commercial and marketing areas, the next CFO and so forth. Another philosophical area which I think is different is in the frequency of evaluation of performance. I think most businesses probably do it quarterly if they're really at a high level, and most probably default to an annual. In sport, it's done real time. It's done real time on the field every week. And also front office, you almost have to be present and immersed daily in what's going on. If there's a movement at another organization or a club, you've got to be aware of that, because it might impact your own plans and strategies moving forward. another organization may I guess reveal a new sponsorship or a new government grant that they've acquired, and you've got to be aware of that, because then you've got to immediately set a train of motion to actually try and leverage as well off that sector or a government ministry and so forth. So the hands have to be on the levers daily in sport, because it can start a sequence of reactions that either lead to a vicious cycle or virtuous cycle. So I think philosophically there's key differences. Sorry for the long-winded response.
No, it's great to just sit here and hear you talk about it, because it gives us an insight that I think many of us don't get. And I want to ask you about your board roles and your experience. But before I get to that, I just want to touch on this culture of excellence. I recently read an article where Novak Djokovic was talking about the sacrifice that was required. And he said, let me just put that into perspective for you. When he won one of the Grand Slams, it was a 6 or 7 hour Aussie Grand Slam. And he said, at the end of it, I tempted myself to have one little block of chocolate and I let it melt in my mouth. And to me, that was a real eye-opener of the level of sacrifice, the level of excellence that ordinary people like me, we think we know what it takes, but we kind of don't too. And you have insight into that, and you just touched onto that. How prevalent is that culture of excellence that we don't see in successful organizations that you get to see on the other side?
It's you've got me pondering on it. Look, I mean, again, I'm going to reference some organizations or individuals that from sport and business that I think most people would be familiar with, whether it's Michael Jordan, whether it's successful sporting organizations like Manchester City or Manchester United under Alex Ferguson, Chicago Bulls, or even corporations like Apple. I'm not sure. I wouldn't myself define excellence as an outcome. It's funny, these organizations, they expect success. Mm-hmm. I think because they know how much time and effort they invest in what they do. I think the more significant reaction you see is when they experience a failure or a setback. It's much more profound than when they succeed. Obviously, they enjoy the successes, but it almost feels like that they expect it. And for that reason, I think excellence, at least in my roles, and even the lectures that I do on leadership with some of the organizations I work with, it's a mindset. I think it's I would probably define it as a desire to improve daily with the discipline to apply that desire, right? Because all of those people and organizations, what happened yesterday, they lock away, and it's almost, it's not the standard for tomorrow, right? They just constantly are improving things. They're always working to improve things. And the organizations I've dealt with and at a board level, I think that's the message we're always trying to impart throughout the organization, is to have that culture that, we did great, but make sure next time the things that we can improve on, we constantly improve on. Because the alternative to that is complacency, where you get comfortable, you're okay with where you are. And especially nowadays, I mean, you'll be passed in days and weeks, by a competitor, by someone, by a disruptor, by someone more ambitious and has greater desire than you.
It's fascinating because a lot of us do get complacent, particularly in business, professionally, personally. When things are going good, you tend to have less hunger or less stress when you're starting out or when things aren't going good. But from the insights that you're providing, it's exactly at those times when the organizations that you see are actually pushing even harder. And I guess that's what compounds towards the results that some of them get.
Yeah, Peter, I mean, we'll probably touch on it as the conversation goes, but all of these organizations, like I said, it's my observation that the setbacks, the challenges, the losses they experience really hurt, right? The wins, the successes, they almost expect. And when anyone else comes into those organizations, what it does, it sets a benchmark. And that allows and enables them to create that kind of legacy success culture. Their successes are not intermittent. It's not they once every 20 years they're winning. I mean, these are organizations that are at the top.
Yeah.
And you will see in their behaviors, in the way that they speak, they expect to constantly be at the top, and they expect everyone in their organization to have that kind of mindset. And they attract and hire that kind of mindset as well.
I'm lamenting as you're saying this because I'm a Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs supporter, and we've had a stretch of a period where we haven't received the results that fans have wanted on the field. I want to use this as a segue into getting to know you, your personal background, your experience. For those that don't know, what was your journey like into where you are at the moment at the corporate and governance level?
Yeah. So I very, very early on, like, well, I can recall when I was even in high school, I loved business, just business in general. I don't know what it was. I think mostly it was probably one of my uncles, who I had a lot of respect and admiration for. Had a number of businesses, and I loved the complexity of it all, dealing with people and always being on the go. He was always wearing a suit and tie, looked impeccable. And I enjoy doing that as well, except I'm in the office, so I'm a bit more relaxed today. But and I love sport. I loved the competitive nature of sport. I loved knowing that there is an opposition that's trying to take you down, and you need to, kind of take them down. And I don't think there's any other sector like that. And what I mean by that is that on a week-to-week basis, you are competing, and in professional sports, it's intense, but there is a really noble element to it, where in the sports business, you also rely on your competitor. Okay, you need them succeeding, you need them successful for you to be successful. So the really successful sporting entities and leagues are the ones where you will, it's very difficult to determine the outcome of the result of the game, and that's what gets people interested. If we know it's going to be a blowout, no one's going to be interested, right? Yeah. So you need the hero villain element. So because of that, I guess, I wanted to get involved in sport in high school. I basically undertook a commerce degree in university at Western Sydney University, and I majored in accounting, sub-major in corporate law, and I wanted that rather than a sports management degree, because I thought, if I don't like working in sport, at least I've got something to fall back on. While I was at university, I was doing work experience in sporting organizations. I liked it. When I finished, I wrote a letter to a few different organizations. I ended up starting work in what was then Soccer Australia in 1996 at the end of, but not in the role that I studied for. It was an international transfers and clearances role. It was a small organization then, probably 20, 25 people, maybe turnover of about 15 mil. And at the not even a year in 1997, we had a World Cup qualifier, played against Iran, had a 2-2 draw, didn't qualify for the World Cup, and literally overnight the organization crumbled pretty much, because they'd budgeted on qualifying,
Wow.
which is you look back on it and it's crazy. And it's a principle that I never have now. You always kind of budget for a conservative position, and if things work out better, then it's a kind of it's money for jam, let's say. But basically at that time, and after 3 months, I started working in the finance department. The organization had a finance department of 4. They moved on 3 others, including the CFO. And the CEO said, can you do this for at least the next few months until we get a CFO in? And I mean, I wasn't even 1 year out of uni. I was also doing my CPA at Deakin University. And I did that job. I did that for 4 years. So I did that. I wasn't even 26. I was company secretary, head of finance. And it was an incredibly challenging period. I'd be working really late. I'd be doing things that you wouldn't expect someone to do, going around telling management staff that we couldn't pay them this week, calling creditors saying, listen, we can't pay. I reflect on it now, all of that. Basically, it's that, get thrown in the deep end, and you just have to adapt. And as a result, being in boardrooms at a young age as a company secretary, I think it's shaped a lot of what, my comfort with responsibility now. So, the journey continued. I worked in the organization until 2007. In 2003, obviously, there was a change in governance. We had John O'Neill come in as CEO, Frank Lowy as chairman, and probably in the space of 18 months, it went from 20 million turnover to almost 100, 110 million. Staff went from 15 to about 100. And that was really where I learned through a unbelievable, at the time, a CFO had come in by then for about 12, 18 months. Probably one of the most influential people in my career. Taught me the importance of system and process, defined system and process in scaling up, right? And if you don't have it, it's really almost a recipe for disaster. So a lot of learnings in 2007 after 12 years, and having been, having had a number of roles, including assistant team manager of the Socceroos in 2006 in Germany. I decided at the age of 31, 32, I wasn't learning as fast as I wanted. And I decided to go out on my own, establish a consulting firm that wanted to bring best practice from other industries into sport. And I've been doing that ever since, Peter, since 2007, consulting to FIFA, FIBA basketball, ICC, AFC, OFC. Maybe I've worked in probably about 90 different countries, leagues, associations, clubs. So
it's an amazing journey. It's
I love it.
Yeah, it's really great to hear that story because it shows that, while many other people would have been content with staying still, you had the hunger, you had the drive to push out. And again, it comes with the culture around what you're seeing, what you're involved in. Our frame of reference is all based on the environment that we put ourselves in and who we associate with. And I think it's just really nice to see humble beginnings, people from a similar community that I'm from, working their way through the corporate ladder and doing amazing things. Tell me about challenges. What are some? We all get hit in the face in our corporate career. We all have those moments that kind of like make or break us. What's that been for you? And have you turned to sport? Have you used sport analogies to help you solve them? Um, what kind of lessons can we learn if you were talking to yourself 15 years ago?
Mm.
What's the kind of lesson that you'd tell yourself, or the mistake not to make again?
Well, I'm not sure I know how to answer that. I mean, there's so many. I thrive on setbacks. Uh, Honestly, I don't enjoy them at all, but I have a philosophical view on that they keep you focused, they keep you sharp, especially in looking for the blind spots. They keep me asking questions. I have them daily. It's not something I try to do, obviously, but I keep trying things, and I keep trying things differently. And that means, I mean, people say, failure and all that kind of thing, but they're just learning experiences. And I'm not sure I've really had challenges that have been
Not big ones, but
maybe it's because of the way I look at them.
it is. It must be.
I don't. Yeah, there's many, mate. There's many. I've been lost elections, for example, on boards. I've had bad results in being a chair of organizations, or maybe their relationships that we probably were a bit harder to develop than others, but everything was resolvable. You take a philosophical view and come back stronger, right?
Yeah, I like that. I like that. You cop a lot of punches, but you're always looking forward and putting them into context. You're not dwelling on them, or having trauma around them.
Well, and now that you mentioned that, I think it helps being in sport, right? Because you don't have time to dwell.
Mm.
Yeah, literally, you play, you lose, you've got to brush it off immediately.
Yeah.
Monday, if it's a professional football team or an elite football team, Monday morning, they're in the lecture theatre or the auditorium. They're doing video sessions.
Yeah.
Right. What happened? They're breaking it down in micro segments and understanding, right, what happened here, make sure it doesn't happen next time.
I love
So
that.
I think that kind of the frequency and the intensity of that feedback loop
Yeah.
means you can't dwell. They're not fatal, right? You've just got to get on with it and make it better next week.
Yeah, I love that. I love that culture. I love that way of thinking. And, it's really inspirational to hear that, because sometimes, we can get caught up in our own bullshit. And, I think it's just nice having that perspective, and you sharing that. It's a great answer, because, that answer in itself has a lot of advice to it. I want to talk about governance a little bit, and I want to bring this into community as we wrap this conversation up. In what we're trying to do so I'm involved in the Assyrian Aid Society. We're a charity, we're a not-for-profit. One of the reasons I decided to get involved in the community was because a lot of times we stand on the sideline and point fingers, and I actually wanted to kind of like be part of that change. And for me, governance is really important, because when we start to do things properly and we start to do things in the way we do them in business, we tend to bring people along on a journey, and we tend to get better results. And so governance in the community, governance is being a word that's being thrown around more now, even in the corporate space. But where do you see kind of the role of governance in community, in organizations, not for profits, things outside of the traditional lens from your vantage point?
Look, I probably default to the experiences and the knowledge I have of governance, the theoretical knowledge, and then the practical experience from my experiences. Governance for me is really about safeguarding the entity, its assets, its brand persona, and its people, right? So as a result of that, it relies heavily on defined and documented frameworks and systems, I think. When I am required to go into an organization, do governance assessments, and then come up with recommendations to remediate or address possible areas that they're being challenged by, it's the first thing I look at, right? Because the governance systems are actually there to serve and support the people in the organizations. It becomes even more important for me, like you said, in like NFPs, not-for-profit organizations, organizations and entities that rely heavily on people's volunteering. Otherwise it can, it's onerous. The level of time and effort that I know you, Peter, and other people that do the same, whether it's charities and so forth, they invest in those organizations is significant. It's huge. And it's worse if there aren't governance systems that actually help them. Even things like checklists or a good constitution that helps the leaders of those organizations to make decisions, how they interact with stakeholders, having that consistent narrative. So I'm not sure if I answered your question and if there's anything specific, but everything starts from governance. Really, it's the central piece of any organization. I will tell very quickly, and it's something I've had to do, because when I have been required to do organizational assessments, I've got like 2 days to assess the performance, the culture, the governance of an organization. I rely on looking at governance frameworks to do that. It will tell you everything you need to know about the people, the organization, and what their capabilities and capacity are, and what their challenges and weaknesses are. So I'm happy to elaborate, but yeah.
One of the things I learned from you in our last conversation was you told me about that poster that you've got either in your room or on your door about the hockey stick chart. And it's how, small things compound over time and make big differences. And in the same way that good things compound to great things, little bad things, little bad habits, letting things slide, having a bad culture, not having those, simple checklists or procedures can compound into huge problems later.
Yeah.
I think that's a really important lesson that I've learned to stop future problems blowing up, start when the problem's smaller.
Yeah, you're talking about I've written it, micro habits to macro outcomes, and it goes both ways. It's you either get on a virtuous cycle that is incredible, whether it's an individual, an institution, a family, a community, whatever it is, right? Or it can be a vicious cycle. And And both of them, as you progress, the velocity builds, right? The inertia and velocity builds. And very quickly you can be doing amazing things you've never heard of. And or very quickly you spiral into things that, you know, you wouldn't wish on you know, your worst enemy. So I think that's really important, and that's why being present and aware on a daily basis is important, especially in institutions.
Well, mate, thank you very much. It's great to get an insight into your world, the experiences that you have. I mean, it's normal nature to you, but I think to a lot of other leaders out there who are fighting their own battle, it's great to see kind of what it takes. To me, it's like it's great to see what it takes to build excellence, what it takes to sit in that boardroom level that you're at, and the way of thinking. Any final words to an entrepreneur or a leader watching this that wants to kind of like take everything that they're doing and that energy to the same level, just as you did when you had to branch out and start your own? What are your words of advice for someone wanting to do better and pushing forward?
You know what? Probably if you're passionate about something, back yourself. Really back yourself. You know, that's probably something I did, but I could have done it earlier. And even now, there's some things in the last 10 years I've been passionate about. I didn't back myself initially, and when I did have the courage to do that, it worked. I reflect. I'd say if you're passionate about something, and that means, you know, you constantly sacrifice time, effort, and energy and invest it into it, back yourself completely.
Words, gold words, and fine words of advice. Thank you very much, Anta. I know you've been
Thanks,
really,
Peter.
particularly with the World Cup. You've been, you know, flat on your feet, and you know, I really appreciate the time that you've given us today, and I'll hope to do this again.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Peter. Thanks for your time.